What's good, my friends? You know who this is, back once again. In this video, we are going to break down a video by this YouTuber who calls herself Rage After Storm. Her video is called Will I Get an Abortion? I will say that I think she attempted to put more thought into her argument more than a lot of pro-choicers, which I can appreciate, as many pro-choicers I've seen simply throw out typical pro-abortion talking points, slogans, and buzzwords. However, her points ultimately still fall back to the same flaws and inconsistencies which a lot of pro-choicers make. With that said, let's jump right in.
I remember a lot of people actually asking me what my opinion on abortion is. And a lot of the time, people I know seem to get the concept that I am either pro-life or pro-choice. The problem is, it's not really that easy to put myself in a spectrum like that.
Now, I can easily see why she'd feel that way, because when you're talking about making arguments to justify killing babies, you're going to have these wishy-washy positions where you try to appeal to points on both sides of the argument. The problem is, when you've done that, you have to put yourself into a spectrum whether you realize it or not. For example, let's say rape. If there are times to where someone says it's okay to rape and times where it isn't, the fact is they have put themselves into a spectrum, and that is rape is justifiable for at least one reason. If you've justified rape for any reason, you inevitably create a dangerous and inescapable slippery slope. There are some things in this world you simply do not attempt to justify for any reason. The same applies to the abortion issue. You cannot escape putting yourself into a specific spectrum no matter how much you try to escape this truth.
I'm a woman who has a boyfriend, thus I am sexually active. Shock horror. And when the topic of abortion comes to the table, I like to imagine myself in the unlucky position that I got pregnant without wanting to get pregnant. So if I were in the situation where my birth control would go completely wrong, I would not want to live in a world where I was not able to terminate that pregnancy.
It's interesting to me, just after saying it's not easy to put herself into a spectrum of pro-life or pro-choice, she very quickly put herself into the spectrum of pro-choice. So I'm confused as to exactly why she said it's not easy to put herself into a spectrum of either position.
And I have to be completely serious right now. If I was caught into that situation, it would be my worst nightmare. Let's just clarify that my worst nightmare would not be to go through the pain of birthing a child, because quite frankly, I'm gonna go through that sooner or later anyway. But my main fear is the adoption separation. The fact that, oh shit, I birthed a child when I was far too young, and I had to give it up for adoption. This separation pain would be far too difficult for me to handle, and not to mention, I just wouldn't be able to take care of a child in the first place right now.
So, her personal feelings that she cannot take care of a child and how it will be emotionally difficult for her to give up the child justifies her killing the kid? It sounds like to me that she's not making it that difficult at all to put herself into the pro-choice spectrum, which sounds contradictory to where she started from. But maybe I'm just missing something, so let's continue on to see if she provides some further context to explain what appears to be contradictory at the moment.
So when I do weigh up the pros and cons of abortion, when I talk about pro-life and pro-choice, or whatever you want to call it, I tend to think about myself and the situation that I put myself in.
And there it is. How is that not easily putting herself into the pro-choice spectrum? That's literally what pro-choicers argue, that a woman should think about herself and her situation. She just absolutely confirmed how quickly she contradicted herself. But maybe even more context will get her out of the hole she's dug for herself. Let's listen further.
But there's a difference for me with someone being responsible when they're sexually active and accidentally getting pregnant, and someone not being responsible when they're sexually active and then getting pregnant.
And she digs the hole even further. Notice what she said, that there is a difference for her between someone being responsible when they are sexually active and accidentally getting pregnant, and someone not being responsible when they are sexually active and getting pregnant. First of all, she said there's a difference for her.
But there's a difference for me. But there's a difference for me. But there's a difference for me.
But there's a difference for me. But there's a difference for me. But there's a difference for me.
I simply can't emphasize this enough. When she's saying there is a difference for her, she's not making an objective argument. She's making a subjective argument. She's saying what she feels is a difference for her. She's making an argument subjective to her feelings, which means someone who feels different than her and will feel there is no difference in what she mentioned can be equally justified in their disagreement simply by their own personal feelings. She has no objective basis at all to say she's more sound than someone disagreeing with her, so she's really just begging the question at the end of the day. Second, I'll further add on to how absurd she's arguing by taking into account what she says next.
So this is where the timestamp of pregnancy determination kicks in. But a lot of people don't notice until the 5th month or the 6th month until they get a fucking bulge. If we are going to talk about ethics here, life to me does not begin at conception. It probably begins at the 2nd or 3rd trimester, except the 2nd and 3rd trimester are quite a while apart, so maybe I should say the 2nd trimester.
Once again, she goes with this "to me" crap. She said, "To me, life does not begin at conception." Listen again.
Life to me does not begin at conception. Life to me does not begin at conception. Life to me does not begin at conception.
Life to me does not begin at conception. Life to me does not begin at conception. Life to me does not begin at conception.
She is clearly scientifically illiterate in this area because the current science contradicts what she says about life. And I'll have references in the description which disproves her subjective feelings. It doesn't matter what she feels, science trumps her feelings. In the next part of our response, she goes into describing first trimester abortion procedures and why she brings it up. But for the sake of time, I've cut that part out. If you want to see all of what she said in the original video, the link to it is in the description.
I'm not mentioning these abortion procedures for the banter and for the fun of it. I am mentioning these procedures just to tell you guys there is not just one solid abortion method. But my point is, I completely approve of these early stage method abortion procedures because they are usually done by a tablet, by an injection. I'm not here to say that I don't approve of surgical abortion methods, but I do only approve of them given certain circumstances.
And her point is, if she believes the choice should be ultimately up to the women getting said procedures, whether she approves of them or not is beside the point.
A surgical abortion method is called aspiration, which is performed within the first 6 to 16 weeks. You're sedated and given antibiotics to prevent infection. Basically, the fetus and placenta is removed via suction. That's brutal. That is... 16 weeks is about 4 months. That's quite far on in the pregnancy, but it's still, that's heavy. That's ridiculous. You would have to wait 4 months to realize that you're pregnant. After about 4 months, my ethics line has been drawn.
Once again, she says her ethics line has been drawn. But who cares what her ethics line is? She's not the pregnant woman. If she's only talking about her ethics line, then she has no objective basis to say anybody else's ethics line is morally wrong. But this is the typical pro-choice logic. Only talk about their personal ethics lines because they know they have no objective basis for banning abortions they find ethically disgusting.
If you are able to get a pregnancy test within this time, if you have the financial capabilities, after 4 months, if you want an abortion, you're gonna have to think about what you're doing.
Shouldn't one be thinking about what they are doing anyway, early or not? It's not like she outright said abortion should absolutely be banned after 4 months. So, if someone really put thought into getting an abortion after 4 months, does it magically make it okay if they've really thought about it? Does the amount of thought one put into making an action magically justify that action?
The method that is used after 4 months is called evacuation and dilation. A synthetic dilator is inserted into your cervix around 24 hours before the actual procedure is carried out. And in some cases, a shot may be given to kill the fetus. And I'm emphasizing some here because in many cases, this shot is not given. The fetus is still alive during the abortion process. A tube is then inserted into your cervix to remove the lining of the placenta. Forceps are used to pull apart the limbs slowly. The lining is scraped to remove any residuals. The fetus after that is completely removed. And just imagine someone had to pull off a fucking leg out of your cervix because you weren't careful enough.
Again, it doesn't matter. If she isn't going to be outright honest and unequivocally clear these abortions should be banned, her feelings of disgust on the matter of whether someone was quote-unquote being careful enough or not are outright irrelevant.
So I'm going to make up a scenario where a woman is abducted. Then they are abused sexually by their abductor. After a certain amount of months, this woman then becomes pregnant. The woman lives in exile from the rest of civilization, and thus she is not able to get an abortion. Eventually, this woman manages to escape, however only within the 6th month of pregnancy. Obviously, if that were me, I would not want to carry the child of my possible abuser. In my eyes, this would still be an ethical process to make, because the victim in this case was not able to get an abortion within a short amount of time or be responsible with their sexual activity.
That is an interesting scenario indeed, and I'm going to add in some particulars for her to consider. Would she extend that scenario to if the woman manages to escape at 7 months, 8 months, 8.5 months? After all, if the woman wasn't able to get the abortion early enough or be responsible with her sexual activity, then even later points should fall easily within her parameters, correct? Is there not any point of cutoff with this exception before birth? Or how about this scenario? She's forced to have the kid by the rapist, going through the entire pregnancy. She never had any chance to be sexually responsible or get an abortion, but she escapes, and even manages to escape with her baby. Should she be able to kill the baby because she never got to make that choice and was forced to having that child? If not, why not? The choice to kill the kid, which she would have been able to make with the kid in the womb, is it magically taken away from her for keeps just because the child is now born and outside of her? If that choice is taken away from her for keeps, who says so? Once again, this sort of arbitrary thinking results in all sorts of absurdities, which is what nonsensical pro-abort thinking like hers leads to.
Even places like China, where they have carried out one-child policies, they have administered abortions within 6 months as well. Some of them even were carried out after 6 months.
It's interesting to me she's attempting to make any arguments at all to justify abortion, but makes absolutely no argument against China's limited child policies, which forces how many children women can have. I find it quite ironic people arguing on her side of the abortion issue often seem so adamant about making arguments to justify killing children, but seem to be silent when countries like China are forcing the amount of children people can have. Where are the arguments against forcing the amount of children women can have? Doesn't sound very pro-choice to me.
What's another exception? Well, obviously you have the standard rape exception. This person who is a rape victim is not able to control their sexual activities because it's not voluntary.
This goes back again to the scenario she brought up in which a woman is kidnapped and raped, being exiled from society. Since she wasn't able to be sexually responsible and her pregnancy was involuntary, how long does she get to make the decision to kill her unborn child? For 4 months, 6 months, 8 months? In the rape scenario, should there be a limit in pregnancy at all? If so, who says? If not, then what moral problem could there possibly be if a woman has her child killed extremely late, let's say up to 1 day before she was due?
But what would you do if you found out that the fetus would have a severe mental disability? Genetic problems such as cystic fibrosis and Down syndrome can all be discovered during the course of pregnancy. So what if you found out that your developing fetus had one of those problems? I am not speaking for anyone else here, but if this were the case of my life, I would abort the baby. This is because I do not have the patience or mental capacity or emotional capacity to raise a child like this. I don't draw the line here when there is a possibility of birthing a child that cannot contribute to future society.
Okay, I'm just going to be frank here. That argument is just downright stupid. Why? The reason why that argument is so stupid is because why does the fact that whether a child can contribute to society or not, given their mental capacities and capabilities, make one killing their child more justified than someone else? One is magically not justified in getting an abortion if their unborn has no such mental deformities? If this is what she's implying, then she's making absolutely no sense. Furthermore, what if there's a misdiagnosis in the womb and it turns out the child doesn't actually possess any such deformity? Misdiagnosis is a risk, so you're going to risk potentially killing a child, which actually falls into the parameters of a child you're more emotionally comfortable dealing with. Not only is this a stupid argument, but the reason why you wouldn't be patient with that child, which has that issue by no choice of their own, simply means you suck as a person. I can understand you not having the patience, but at least giving that child to a loving family who would, and love that child all the time and all the same. But I absolutely cannot understand you positing that as a reason you kill your kid, because actually seeing the deformity and dealing with it would make you personally emotional, cause you problems. And I make absolutely no apologies for saying that logic that you put forth means you suck as a person. It's not the child's fault that you suck. Let's have a moment of silence for this outright stupidity of yours. Thank you, and now we return to our regularly scheduled programming.
And what annoys me even more is the parents that decide to take the test and then birth the child with the expectation that the government and taxpayers then pay for their child. Obviously, a lot of people would disagree with me on this, but that's just how I feel.
I agree wholeheartedly a child should not be the responsibility of taxpayers, but that's an entirely separate issue. I'm not exactly sure why she's bringing this up. That would be an issue of working out legal issues with where taxpayer money goes, not an issue of connecting that as a reason to kill children, if she's indeed attempting to make that connection. And if so, then this is nothing more than a red herring.
How do we define a human being as a human being in society? Do we define a human being with characteristics that enable them to survive without the help of taxpayers' money? Think about it this way. We kill animals for food, right? And we see it as ethical because animals do not have the mental capacity that we do, right? What about babies that are born? They probably don't have the same mental capacity as we do. They probably are similar in the mental capacity of an animal. But a lot of people would argue that the difference is that a human baby has the capability of being an intelligent life form. Whereas a baby fox, for example, would never be able to reach that intelligence level. Obviously, we are using a normal, healthy baby as an example, and not maybe a baby with Down syndrome or other mental handicaps.
It is typically the argument of pro-choicers, not pro-lifers, who would use things like intelligence levels, development levels, mental capabilities, like the argument she gave about Down syndrome, etc., to factor into what defines a human being in society. But the informed secular pro-lifer argues that what defines a human being is simply the essence of being a human, nothing else. I leave the secular arguments for the secular pro-lifers to make. However, as a Christian, the human in the womb is endowed, having been made in the image of God. That is my ultimate foundation in what separates humans from animals. But even the secular pro-choicer will have a very difficult time being consistent in our arguments of attempting to define a human being by size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. This is what is called the SLED test. I have a link to the SLED test in the description.
So, is a fetus a human life form? Technically, logically speaking, it is just a collection of cells, but any life form is a collection of cells. So at what cell count do we determine a life form? Sadly, that's a question I cannot answer, and I really wish I did know, but it is really interesting to think about it.
So, you don't have the answer to that question, yet for some reason you have this ethical line drawn at 4 months anyway? Now I want to be clear that I'm not making an argument for absolute knowledge to draw the line at 4 months. Rather, I'm making the argument that based on the subjectivity you've argued for in your position so far, and stacking that on top of how you don't know the answer to that question, you are making a cumulative case against yourself for drawing the line at any point. No matter where you draw the line, your argument is absolutely baseless.
Now, obviously, we have the size of the life form in question. So, for instance, one fetus can have a different number of cells in the exact same stage of development as another fetus. The Catholic Church has a huge stance of ethics when it comes to abortion and even contraception. The Catholic Church believes that the human life begins at conception, thus abortion being a sin. But where are Catholics taking that stance from? Well, the easy answer is Catholics are taking that stance from a book.
I'm not a Catholic, so I don't speak for the Catholic position, but if she's generalizing all Catholic people as taking their stance that life begins at conception from a book, assuming the book she's talking about is the Holy Bible, then she's making a baseless generalization. As stated earlier, current science contradicts her position, and there very well may be Catholic people making their argument not simply based on what Scripture says, but also science as well.
And here's my problem. If you want to provide a pro-life argument, then I really do recommend that you do some further research rather than taking it from a book that has no substantial evidence to contributing to our society.
Okay, alright, now that's just an outright ignorant assertion. Seeing as a very small minority of people are non-believers, and Christianity has the highest influence in westernized countries like the United States, I'd say a lot of people have contributed to the flourishing of society based on being motivated and influenced by what the Holy Bible teaches. The United States, with its Christian religious influence, has become one of the most powerful and renowned nations the world has ever seen. It is just outright ignorance to claim there is no such evidence what is taught in Scripture has contributed to the well-being and flourishing of our westernized society. Her ignorance isn't an argument.
Because if your argument is that you don't believe in abortion because of, well, Catholicism, then you really do need to rethink your priorities and where you are gaining your sources from.
I don't know if she's an atheist, but assuming she is, what basis does she have to tell anyone to rethink their priorities? She hasn't this entire video argued her position on objectivity at all. So it's her personal view she based her position on, an indication she has her priorities straight. Oh man, this is just so awesome, my friends. Just hilarious.
You cannot just simply state your beliefs from a storybook, just because you think that's right.
First of all, she clearly doesn't know the Bible. Again, assuming that's what she's referring to, it's merely a storybook. She's clearly bringing her own assumptions and nonsense to the table to predicate her argument. And second, it goes back yet again to her saying her moral relativism gives her no basis to say anyone should or shouldn't predicate their argument in whatever way they choose to argue it, whether basing it on stories or not.
The main aspect here is that you think for yourself rather than following a group, an ideology.
Yes, because her arguments certainly sound nothing like a typical pro-choicer. This is just ridiculous. Give me a break. Just the irony is just crazy here, my friends. Everyone has a particular ideology, so she needs to look in the mirror and take her own advice in reevaluating her priorities. Excluding a higher deity out the picture isn't proof when one makes an argument they are necessarily thinking for themselves.
You cannot exactly use a holy book that has no substantial evidence to be true as part of an ethical topic.
And she continues to double down in her ignorance and running with it as an argument. This is nothing short of pathetic, my friends.
Sure, you could use it as an example to why you follow a certain lifestyle, but it's not necessarily a fair argument to be used to prohibit others from doing the same actions.
Except for the fact that people use their personal views all the time to prohibit others from doing particular actions. This has nothing to do with whether someone is religious and using a religious appeal or not. For example, if someone is being rude by insulting the cashier doing their job for no good reason, there are others who might step in to interrupt what they're doing, such as management running the store might outright make that person leave immediately. Laws are formed all the time to prohibit others from doing particular actions, which are quite often formed by the subjective opinions of lawmakers. So, merely the fact of having views to prohibit others from doing something doesn't in and of itself prove that such reasoning is unethical. She needs to provide a more in-depth basis for her reasoning than this, which I don't see how she'd be able to provide it anyway, given her morally relativistic thinking.
Personally though, I wouldn't use evidence of a book with no known origin as evidence for my argument.
Having already addressed this, there's nothing further for us to add here. And so with that said, thank you all so much for watching once again, and as always, please like this video, share this video, and subscribe. Take care, God bless, deuces.